We have to first start with the theory that Luther and Diem are already mated by the end of Heat of the Everflame. But first, a refresher on what we know about mates in this world. To become mates, there is a ritual where the two individuals shed a drop of blood and commit their hearts to one another for eternity. If the magic declares your love to be genuine and unconditional, a mark appears, and your bodies become two halves of a whole. If you're away from your mate, you can get ill, your magic will weaken, and you can even die from the separation. If one mate is imprisoned, the other is permitted access to them at all times because to separate mates is an insult to the kindred themselves. Last thing here is when you run your fingers across the mating mark, it glows and the other can feel them touching the mark.
Okay, so that is how the mating bond works. Let's start with explaining how Luther could have performed this mating ritual, because yes, it would have been separate. After Luther and Diem bang, bang, bangity bang in the library in Sophos, they are eating apples, and Diem starts talking about their future, specifically about the apple orchard on their land that they'll acquire near her family's old cottage, and their house being something that they can grow into as a family. Luther goes still and silent for a long time, and then his knuckles go white. His hand slips from the apple and the knife, sending the knife slicing right over his heart. And when Diem's like, Luther, what the heck? You're a skilled warrior, my guy. Quote, he stared at me, lips parted, face bloodless. His eyes were aglow, but not with the usual luminous light, something warmer. Oh my God. I 100% believe that him going quiet for a long time is him in his head committing himself to Diem as mates, as future and all that stuff together. And then he's like, oh no, oops, and just like slices his heart open.
Oh, so you think that he slipped and sliced himself on purpose?
No, well, on purpose, because he's like, yeah, he's like, let me commit the mating ritual right now. I absolutely think it was on purpose.
Interesting.
You don't?
I was under the impression that both of them will accidentally do the mating bond.
I don't think so. I think Luther knew something could happen where they might be separated, and he wanted to have this extra security for it where he would be connected to her. Because it can be a one-sided mating bond.
But why wouldn't it? But if she's essentially declaring her love for him, why wouldn't he be like, hey, you know what we should do right now?
Because earlier in the series, she was like, you know, I'm not the kind of person who could ever do that. And he's like, that's fine. I'll take what I can get. So I think that
okay, that's a good point. That's a good point.
So I definitely think he did this on purpose. Yes. I do not think he told her because he didn't know if she was like, let's absolutely be mates, or if she was like, I just see a future with you, because it might be different for her, but it's not anymore.
True.
Now, another moment that supports this is when all hell breaks loose on the island at the end of Heat, and Diem is trying to get Luther and tell her out. Sarai arrives, and Luther says, quote, it worked. It actually worked. I didn't think ... So if he and her are mates, or at least he is mated to her, we'll say, he would probably be able to call Sarai through the adjacent mating bond, I'll call it. And then when Diem asked, like, what worked? What are you talking about? Quote, his features strained, like he was holding something back, something desperately, painfully important.
Yep.
Like, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that's how Luther could have gotten his mating mark. Let's talk about Diem now. Many people, including us, believe that when she was stabbed by Igneos at the very end of Heat, that solidified her end of the mating bond. Right before she's stabbed, Diem is looking at Luther and Sarai and Teller like flying off into the sunset. And she's thinking about how, because Luther is alive, there is a hope for a future between them. And as part of that future, the first thing that she does when she sees him next is she's going to offer up her blood and tell him that she's ready to be his, and then she's stabbed. The mating bond magic works where you are committing yourself to be someone's mate, and then you give some blood, and then that's how the mating bond works. Looking at the mating ritual, this absolutely would count, just in a very Penn Cole style of writing way. But the big clue here is that the placement is identical to Luther's, quote, straight through the center of her heart. But more so in the writing around how her experience around getting stabbed. Because when you're first reading it, you're like, something's off here. Like something's
Well, when I first read it, I thought that it was how her body was reacting to the Godstone that was stabbing her.
I think that's what we're supposed to think.
Oh, I agree. But it's
absolutely.
actually the mating bond. Yeah. Or it could always be both as well. Yeah.
Well, so let's talk about this language. It feels warm, which is the same language as is on Luther's face right after he cuts himself. It's described as being warm. It feels like her heart is being cut in half, which lines up with that two halves of one whole language from Eleanor and Taryn in Glow. And, quote, there was an unexpected pleasure in it too, a particular rightness, a feeling like I'd gained something I desperately wanted. It would also be so sweet if their mating mark is over their hearts because they call each other my heart, which is just the sweetest thing. I love this book so much. I'm convinced they're already mates. Like, this is canon to me. But this does raise a few questions now going into Burn. If they are mates, they would be able to touch their mating mark and the other person would know that they're A, alive, and B, touching their mating mark, aka, oh, we're two-way mates. There are multiple times in the 3 chapters of Burn where Luther is like rubbing his chest. It doesn't say heart, it just says chest. And I think this might be a sign of like, hey, mating telephone, are you working? Are you working? So here's my theory. In the first 3 chapters of Burn, there's one moment specifically that really, in my opinion, leads like neon sign to them being mates. This is from Luther's POV. Quote, my heart seemed to have an innate sense of where it was at all times. I'd left a piece of myself at that temple. Burr, 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 and I would never be whole without her in my arms. Again, that two halves of one whole language is everywhere. So here's my, I'm not going to even call it a crack theory. Here's my like assumption or an idea that I have is I think that we're going to get a end of Luther POV chapter where he touches his heart and it starts to glow. And that's how he knows not only that DM has completed the mating ritual, but he also knows that 100% DM is alive. And then we're going to cut to a DM POV chapter.
I could definitely see that. Separate from the mating mark, Luther also has the compass that points in the direction of his heart's greatest desire. And since DM became trapped, it's been spinning aimlessly because the magic on the island prevents it from showing Luther what he wants most, which is DM. He thinks as soon as she escapes, it will point him in the right direction. So no matter what, I will say I love your idea of that with like the mating mark, especially because we did get just like a tiny bit of foreshadowing. It's just like it's important, but it's not in your face there in heat. No matter what, I do think that this aimlessly spinning compass is foreshadowing for how he will know when she is free from the island.
I will say, as I was reading the 3 chapters, I was like, could this be the aimless spinning because she's been stabbed? And like maybe a part, not all of her died because she's not dying. Like we know that. Right. Like, there's no way. But maybe like a part of her died. So it's spinning because the part he's looking for or the part that the compass is looking for, I'll say, is dead.
There is that theory that when she dies, she like loses that sense of humanity, not unlike her sire. So I personally don't believe that. And we will definitely get into DM and all of that here soon.
Cool. Oh, I'm excited. So continuing on with this mates conversation, we do know that mates get ill or their magic weakens when they are away from each other for too long, which I don't feel like that's an accident that was written. That makes me deeply concerned.
Well, with that knowledge, I will say to counter this theory that, of course, we do definitely both believe, the first 3 chapters in Luther's POV don't seem to include anything that hints towards these separation consequences, and they have been apart for 4 weeks.
There is one moment where Arlie notices that something's not right with Luther and she's like, are you worried? And he's like, I'm not fucking worried. And she's like, okay, well, if you're not worried, then like, what's up? What are you feeling? And he thinks, quote, I kept my silence. The truth was too raw, too painful to explain. So maybe, I don't think he's ill. I don't think his magic is going away because he's practicing new magic of illusion like Alix has. So I wonder if he's feeling off. I'm not going to call it ill. I wonder if right now he's just feeling off. You know what I mean?
That's true. I guess I assumed that the truth was related to his guilt and things along those lines.
That could be it too.
Because that stood out to me as well. But that's the other thing. Like all of these have different meanings too. That could have different meanings.
Now, the last thing I'll say on this mate stuff is that mates do have access to visit other imprisoned mates. Do we think that they're either going to be able to visit each other where he'll be able to come onto the island? I don't think so because of the magic. Like they would have to change the spell. Or do you think they're going to at least try that card?
I don't think so. I don't think that the crowns would take any risks, knowing especially how powerful Luther is and how much stronger they are together and how fearful they are of that power. I also do think that the crowns wouldn't care that they're mates. Yes, to separate two mates is against what the Kindred would want, but this is also assuming that they somehow, some way found out. Like, I have no idea how that would happen, but I don't think the crowns care enough about appealing to what the Kindred would want in order to then put the two most powerful people together who they definitely don't want together.
I think you are absolutely right. I could see them, if they do figure out that they're mates, like maybe through the glow or through like, oh my God, my chest is glowing, that means we have a two-way mating bond. If they do figure out that they are mates, I could see them attempting this strategy. So a really cool thing about Penn's writing style is she has plotted her entire books in the W format, but she also plots every chapter in the W format. Oh. So I could see with that format, there being the tension of them finding out that they're mates separately and not telling anyone, and then coming together and then like confessing to each other. Like, that's just more what I see when I think of Diem and Luther's characterization, but who knows? I also didn't think Luther would be an ass about hiding his Godstone wound, and yet there he was.
So if we are talking about foreshadowing for two mates being allowed to be together in a prison, I could see that happening later in Burn. We know it's going to be a thick book, so one of them could be separated from the other one and imprisoned, not on the island, but in the realms, and then one of them is allowed. Or I could see another mated couple, whether that is Taryn and Zelric, maybe they become mates. A crazy idea would be Teller and Lily becoming mates too, because we know that it is possible for the mortals to be mated to the Kindred, so maybe mortals can be mated to the Descended. Anyway, I do think that we will see something along those lines play out with imprisonment, but it might not be Luther and Diem.
I love it. Let's move on to the speculation of what happens next for Diem on the island of Coreel.
He ends on the cliffhanger of Diem being stabbed in the heart, but like her sire, who survived a Godstone stab in the heart, it's a very safe bet she will survive it too, even though the blade is made of Godstone, which is deadly to the Descended. Plus, her blood is the cure to Godstone, and when she has this magical eruption right after her mortal father's death, she created Godstone. Only the Kindred are supposed to be able to do that. Plus, Umbros said at the beginning of Spark about Diem's claim that her sire is dead, quote, should be, but he's a survivor. Another trait you inherited, I'm guessing. So there you go. We also have to wonder if Diem saves Igneos, who is currently dying from the Godstone that Umbros scratched him with. We can assume this because we know he survives long enough, at least a month, for Luther to confront him, as Penn told us. Where this confrontation is, we don't know, because it seems the spell has to be broken for either her to leave the island with Igneos or for Luther to step foot on the island again.
It's Diem. She's probably going to save Igneos, I swear to God.
Oh, I'm going to get into that in a minute, yes.
Okay, cool. Well, do you think that there's a side of the story where she convinces Igneos to fight for her side?
No.
Damn it.
I think he's bad to the bone and he will die soon enough. Maybe at Luther's hands.
God,
and
I
then
hope
his
so.
Gryvern can become Diem's too, and then his Gryvern can live happily ever after with Sarai. Now, we do have to say this, it would be very in character for Diem to save Igneos. The two of them are trapped on this island, he is slowly dying, and she is the only one with the ability to help him. Even though he definitely deserves to die, the healer in her and her good heart will have a hard time letting him die when she knows she's the only way to save him. Or Diem accidentally heals him because her blood gets on his wounded wrist. Like, even right when he stabs her and blood comes out. I don't think that actually happened with how the stab wound is, but blood could accidentally get on his wound and therefore she accidentally heals him.
I also would hope for this, but it is Diem. Let's be real, she's gonna heal him. She let Vance go. Not once, not twice, but 3 fucking times. Now, we do know from the first 3 chapters that the Arboros Queen has been leaving supplies on the island each week for Diem. However, they have not been touched.
That's right.
So you would think that at least Igneos would go and snatch it. Like, he's selfish enough where he would go and do that. So it does raise the question, do you think they're still on the island? Because why would their supplies not be touched? Unless they think it's poisoned or something?
That's what I was going to say. Maybe she does think that it's poisoned, although because she doesn't have the extra context. As far as we know, she doesn't have that, although she easily could probably figure it out.
I think that if they would be off the island, the compass of Luther's would be spinning towards her. So I think they're still on the island, but it does raise the question as to why they're not touching the supplies.
I agree with you. Yes, I do think that they are on the island still, but who knows why they're not getting the supplies. At least Igneos, yeah.
It's such a mystery and I love it, but I also need this book in my hands. Let's go back to the spell that Doriel cast that is trapping her on the island. It is as follows from Doriel, quote, "With this spell, we bind DM Bellator to this island. May she never again leave these shores." I mean, that sounds pretty freaking final. When I was going through this, like for this part of the outline, I was like, maybe there's some kind of wording where it's like, maybe like she'll never leave these shores until she dies or something like that. And then that would work around the Godstone wound. But alas, it is may she never again leave these shores. Yes, Lexi? Yes, Lexi?
I have an idea of how this works out. The Umbros Queen says back in Spark on Paradise Row, quote, "When forgotten blood on Heartstone falls, then shall the chains be broken. Life for life, old debt required, or eternal be his yoke." While I have no idea what the second sentence means, we will speculate that later. We figure out that when her blood fell on the Heartstone at the end of Glow, the magic binding her sire, which is essentially the same spell, it broke, and that is how he was able to escape. And it's somehow tied to the foraging magic. I'm not even going to get into that right now. So let's talk about the significance of Diem's blood and its implications with the Heartstone. We know that the Kindred's elemental magic is blood magic, and anyone who shares their blood inherits these abilities. But there's also a second kind, a magic of life and death that flows through everything. I'm assuming that is the foraging magic that the Descended Crowns can tap into, and Diem can to a whole other degree. So the Heartstone acts as a conduit between the Kindred's blood magic and the foraging magic. It allowed the Kindred to weave their magic into this world and control how it can be used. So this Kindred blood magic must be what makes Diem's blood so special. If her sire is actually Omnos, which we will definitely get into soon, that makes her the daughter of a Kindred, so she directly inherited this blood magic and ability to control how magic can be used. All of this to say, I believe Diem will bleed on the Heartstone again, and it will break the spell that binds her to this island. Her blood on the Heartstone helps seal her fate here along with the other crowns, but I think she alone is powerful enough to break it like she unknowingly was able to for her sire's release. And I'll throw in one other thing here, and/or maybe there's something to the 10th Kindred's carving of the 10-pointed star at the temple, which illuminated when she was crowned.
I see now why 2,000 extra words were added to the
I'm only getting started here, Nicole.
Well, okay, so now I have a new theory on how we're going to switch to Diem's POV. So I still think the mate theory and the glow and the whatnot is a possibility. But what if Luther's like about to go to sleep one night and then all of a sudden we hear a click, and that is the compass showing one direction, and then we cut to Diem's POV 4 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago or whatever.
I definitely think we will definitely get that, the 4 weeks
like
ago
going
there.
back in time.
Yep.
Oh my God, I love this series. All right, it's time to talk about this vision, though, that Luther and Diem have together. The vision is Diem is wearing a suit of dark, glittering black armor, probably Godstone, courtesy of Alix's project that she's working on. Diem is carrying around a gilded blade of black and gold, surrounded by a ring of corpses extending far and wide. Luther is standing across from her with a blood-soaked sword of Corbois, which is the jewel hilt that is over his shoulder, always that she makes fun of him for. He is looking at her, and he lays a palm over the left side of his chest, and Diem echoes the movement. That's their mating mark. I mean, that is it right there. Like, my God, I love it. The form of a man.
Now, I while I agree with you, that is also the sign of I am with you, Queen. Like it's like a salute, so to speak.
Agreed. I think that's what we're supposed to think, and then it's actually the mating mark. Like I think it's that what we go feral for in these types of stories, where it's like it means one thing, but it actually means another. There is a form of a man that is glowing bright as the moon. He is gray and colorless, aka this is Ophiuchi.
He tells her, the daughter of the Forgotten, to join him and end the descended rule, destroy this world, and build it anew. She hesitates and has an internal battle with herself as she continues coming to terms with being descended and with being mortal. But she will fight with everything she has to protect both people, quote, from each other and from him.
Then in this vision, she lifts her sword and silver flames rise around her. And then there's an explosion of endless white light, which sounds very similar to how she reacted after Andre, her mortal father, died. And she had that big explosion where she created Godstone, though it did not say silver flame. It was just an explosion of light. And then a voice within her, we're assuming maybe her godhood, whispers, now, daughter of the Forgotten, now you are ready. I love it.
I literally just got
I know,
chills.
see?
This vision is definitely the cover art for Burn of the Everflame. I think we're pretty confident in that.
Oh, yeah.
The cover does keep getting more fiery with each book. We're assuming that fire is probably representative of the Everflame. Or maybe it is in reference to the silver fire she's surrounded with in this vision. I will say, though, of course, the cover is more yellow and orange flames, not a silver flame, though.
So let's talk about the silver fire because I'm stumped. I have no idea what this is, but I'm assuming you do. I'm assuming you have an idea.
So it's not mentioned at all in either spark or heat, and silver fire or silver flames are only referred to in the vision she has in Glow. Maybe it's her full power unleashed, but I also think a lot of the dead bodies circling her feet might be from the silver flame, and DM will have to grapple with this death and destruction she caused. Umbros said her heir will be DM's most difficult adversary, and they will stand in the way of what she needs to do, drive a wedge between her and those she loves, and they will cost her a terrible price, possibly put her in a premature grave. I think that Umbros is saying DM will be her own worst enemy because she has to face and even embrace her dark and deadly side, which is what the silver flame represents.
Yes, retweet. Absolutely. What you just said. Now, I will also say that Umbros mentions, like, how much are you willing to sacrifice, DM? And DM's like, I'm willing to sacrifice my life. And Umbros is like, that's the easy part. And the implication is that, are you willing to sacrifice the people you love? Or are you willing to sacrifice another human life or something like that? Like, DM sacrificing herself is something she does in every chapter almost, it feels like. So that could also be what Umbros is referring to here.
Absolutely. Then we have the weapon and how it plays a part. Remember that DM had the weapon in Sophos and she called it a true piece of art, but then she had to give it back. It had come from the archives and it used to belong to the Kindred. I don't think it said which Kindred, but what if it was Omnos's and they took it from him, and that is why DM feels called to it and why it might actually be able to kill her sire. It's a broadsword with a gilded, finely carved handle and a wide, glittering onyx blade. This blade is inlaid with golden scroll work, almost like words, but not in any language DM recognizes.
We know that the Kindred came from a different world. What if this is the home world language of the Kindred? Or of the Everflame. It could be of them too, but assuming because it's a sword of the Kindred, I would assume it's like the home world. There's also mention of a glassy disc in the center. I have no idea what this means, but I'm excited to find out.
Well, and then when DM takes a broadsword, its energy warms her skin and the blade pulses with a soft silvery glow. Maybe as an apology, Sophos will give the sword back to her. She does need some way to get it back because, yes, I do think that this sword will be one of the only things, maybe the only thing that can defeat her sire since it comes from the Kindred and calls to DM.
Or another option is Teller could steal it from Sophos. Now, Teller is not currently in Sophos, and I would assume, actually, he's probably not welcome back, considering that he was under Doriel's guard and clutches and, you know, like golden chains, all that kind of stuff that DM said at the end. But then he ran off with Luther, and he's now with the Guardian, so probably not. But, I mean, Teller also does have the strongest connection to Sophos, so maybe.
Ultimately, I believe that this vision is the final battle. Good versus evil, restoring the balance of the Kindred and the Everflame, and it's going to be ugly on all sides. The world will seem like it is burning, hence the name of this book. But when the world goes to ash, what comes of it? The phoenix rises, better and stronger than before, the symbol of House Courbois.
I'm literally having an out-of-body experience right now. Like, this is so good. Now
and as we've already been doing this episode, I already came across all this other stuff that we didn't even mention in this. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I just need 5 more episodes of this.